Welcome to my show, and I host the most interesting and influential people from all around the world. And today I'm honored to have Professor Alan Derschowitz on the show. Professor Derschowitz is a longtime warrior for free speech, the American Constitution, and of course, Israel. He is the author of many books, including The Case for Israel, a must-read for anyone who wishes to understand the case for the Jewish state with historic and international perspective. So Professor Derschowitz, many thanks for joining me today on the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. Now, with your permission, since we don't have plenty of time, I would like to cover a few topics. So let's start with Jonathan Pollard. You said many times that O.J. Simpson's acquittal was at Yom Kippur Eve, and at the synagogue, people said to you, Mazel Tov. But you said, don't say Mazel Tov, I'm not happy. I just did my job, and don't forget that in this story, someone got murdered. Now, it seems that we have a completely different story with Pollard. So let me ask you this. According to the US intelligence, Pollard caused a great harm to your country, the US. Are you happy now?
I'm very happy. He hasn't been acquitted. He served 30 years in jail and 5 years on probation. After being promised that he would not get a sentence of that kind. He made a deal, and the United States government broke the deal. And the villain of the piece was the former Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger. He arranged for the deal to be broken. Pollard was supposed to serve a short term. Every other person who ever spied for an American ally served a relatively short term. And then his sentence was affirmed by 3 judges, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who just died. She was on the panel and voted in favor of keeping him in prison. He should have been released a long time ago. This is not a cause for celebration or making him a hero or acting as if this was a political decision by the Trump administration. It was a humanitarian decision based on the fact that he served his time completely and served it without any problems.
Okay, so let me tell you, let me ask you this. There was an opinion article yesterday in Israel that said that that Israeli, yes, don't need to publicly celebrate his return because according to the author, Professor Nadav Shnerb, Israeli spying in the US is like send someone to steal money from your father's wallet. It is inexcusable. Hence the unproportional punishment. Now, if you remember correctly, you said that the punishment was so painful since the judges were Jewish or self-hating Jews. So what do you think regarding what we did, what Israel did was in fact inexcusable?
I think it was foolish, but I don't think inexcusable. The United States spies on Israel, let there be no doubt about that. Every country spies on every other country. The United States spies on Great Britain. Great Britain spies on the United States. Every country spies on each other. The foolish thing was getting caught. But it wasn't Jonathan Pollard's fault. He was asked by the Israeli intelligence to spy. If anybody is to blame for it, it's his handlers and Israeli intelligence. Apparently, the decision to use an American was made near the very top of the Israeli government. So Pollard was just a pawn in an effort by Israel to receive information. And let's remember, too, that Israel was supposed to receive this information. And Caspar Weinberger, who was born to a Jewish family and was a self-hating Jew, cut out the intelligence exchanges between Israel and the United States. And Jonathan Pollard thought that that endangered Israel. And so he provided the information criminally and wrongly. He shouldn't have done it. But he should have gotten about an 8 or 10 year sentence. That was the sentence that Americans got for spying for Egypt, for spying for Poland, for spying for other countries. The fact that he was Jewish and spied for the nation state of the Jewish people, according to even CIA people, his Jewishness and Israel's Jewishness played a role in the length of the sentence. I've never described the people who kept him in jail as self-hating Jews, except for Caspar Weinberger. He fit that description. But he should not be, there should not be a celebration. There should not be, he should not be made into a hero. The relationships between Israel and the United States must be maintained, particularly in light of the new administration coming in. And so I think he should be quietly welcomed and allowed to live his life out this was a humanitarian act, not a political act, to finally allow him to be free.
So since we discussed the American judges, let's move on with your permission to Amy Coney Barrett. Now, Ted Cruz said that this nomination was, and he said it over and over again, impeccable. Now, however, many of the voices against her comes from radical feminists. So with, to my humble understanding, a Supreme Court judge is like basically as high as you get. There is almost nothing which is more prestigious than being a Supreme Court judge. But it seems that it's not enough for the radical feminists who were in hard voices against Amy Coney Barrett. So isn't it enough? What else can Amy Coney Barrett do in order to radical feminists say, wow, she is a woman and she made it to the top position in the US?
What radical feminists are concerned about, and legitimately concerned about, I'm concerned about it too, is how she will vote on a woman's right to choose abortion, how she will vote on healthcare, how she will vote on gay rights. She is a deeply, deeply religious Catholic who has written a law review article, co-authored when she was a law clerk, in which she said that if her personal or religious views conflict with the views of the Constitution or the views of American law, she might have to recuse herself from any of the cases. So I think what radical feminists were concerned about was not her integrity, not her qualifications, but her legal positions, her jurisprudence. And they're entitled to object because justices play an important role in American life. That's happening in Israel today too. You know, when Israeli Supreme Court justices were not rendering decisions that had major impact on the lives of Israelis, most Israelis simply accepted the justices, didn't want to know how they were selected. That was not a concern. But as Israeli justices are more activist, and I think they've done, many of them, a great job, many opinions, the Israeli Supreme Court is one of the most respected institutions in the world. But it's inevitable that when justices begin to influence the lives of citizens, citizens become more interested in how they're selected, who they are, what their opinions are going to be. So you have a direct relationship between the activism of justices, the politicization of the courts, and the interests of citizens in the processes by which they get nominated. That happens in every country.
Now, from what I understand, and now there is a debate between the more activist and less activist approach in the Supreme Court, and the conservative view said that since judges are not publicly elected and are not nominated to be re-elected every 4 or 5 years, therefore they cannot influence or they cannot insert their own opinions. So, and I have heard many times that Amy Coney Barrett said, I'm not going to intertwine or to insert my own opinion into the law. I'm going, and this is like a very famous US approach, that I'm going to judge according to the law and not according to what I think should be the law, like Professor Aaron Barak usually say.
That's right. And Aaron Barak is a very close friend, and I admire him enormously. And he usually stands by those principles. In America, there's a lot more hypocrisy. Some of the most conservative judges have become very activist in striking down cases. The greatest example of that was during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, when judges struck down much of the New Deal, and they had to be threatened with court packing before they changed their mind. Today also, one of the most important decisions in front of the Supreme Court is whether to strike down the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. So conservative judges become activists when they don't like the laws, and liberal judges become activists when they think the laws violate freedom and liberty. So both sides become activists when it serves their ideological interests, and both sides become cautious and conservative when that serves their ideological interests. So if you ask me what the jurisprudence of most American judges is, I would answer in one word: hypocrisy. They're hypocrites. Most, not all, but most, and many American scholars of constitutional law are the same. The Constitution always comes out in favor of their particular ideology rather than according to some objective standard of the law.
But it's not just like this, not just going in favor of your ideology, but say, listen, I'm above all these human beliefs and thoughts. I judge according to what justice is, but in fact, what you are doing is go with your heart. So what you basically said, listen, a judge is basically a human being, and he can't detach himself from his own beliefs and from...
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think judges could, they just don't. If I were a judge, I never wanted to be a judge. I know I would detach myself from my personal views because I've done so as a lawyer. For example, when I represented President Trump in front of the United States Senate, I was not a Trump supporter. I voted against Trump. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I contributed to her campaign. I'm a liberal Democrat. But I don't believe the law permitted the impeachment and removal of President Trump. So I am, I think, one of the few American lawyers who has not only been able but willing to separate out my personal, political, ideological views from my legal views. I wish more judges would follow that. I call it the shoe on the other foot test. If the shoe were on the other foot, if the situation were different, if your ideology came out differently depending on the outcome of the case, how would you vote? For example, in 2000, when the Supreme Court handed the election over to President George W. Bush, I believe that had the shoe been on the other foot, had the case involved Gore suing Bush rather than Bush suing Gore, I think the decision would have been different. So I think judges are able to separate out their views. Justice Brandeis did it. Justice Frankfurter did it. Some other justices over time have done it. Oliver Wendell Holmes, I think, often did it. But judges choose not to do it, and they allow their ideology to influence their constitutional analysis.
Alan, first, you are very special, and second, I think that many people don't understand it, and as an evidence, sees a sketch in SNL, Saturday Night Live, after your impeachment speech. They like the devil coming and hug you because they can't detach one thing from another. And I will also say that also your mother cannot, because when you defended pro-Nazis protest in Times Square, I think your mother came and said, listen, Alan, are you with the pro-Nazi or with the Jewish people? So it's very hard to detach yourself. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree with you. And I don't blame my mother. My mother didn't go to college. She was not educated. She was very smart. But I do blame, Professor Lawrence Tribe. He understands the difference, but he doesn't act on it. I understand very smart people who understand the difference, but don't act on it. So there are those who don't understand it. That's fine. You can't condemn people for their lack of understanding. But then there are the blatant hypocrites who completely understand it and nonetheless act in violation of that principle. Even though they espouse the principle, they always act in violation. Professor Lawrence Tribe never, ever, as far as I can tell, found a constitutional argument that didn't agree with his own personal politics, his own personal preferences, his own personal ideology. It just by amazing coincidence, the Constitution always coincides with his own personal views. That's not the case with me. That's not been the case with Justice Brandeis and many others. But when the Constitution always coincides with your own personal views, people have to be suspicious of your credibility and integrity. And I think there are many judges and constitutional scholars in America. Now, of course, Saturday Night Live is going to mock me and have me hugging the devil. I am the devil's advocate. I mean, that's the position I've taken as a teacher for years. When I taught for 50 years at Harvard, the students didn't know what my personal views were because I always expressed views in class in order to challenge the students. My job as a professor was not to tell the students what to think, it was to teach them how to think. And in order to do that, I used what I call the Talmudic approach. Others call it the Socratic approach. But every answer got a new question. There was no such thing as a correct answer in my class. And I challenged everybody. And that's why one of my favorite students was Ted Cruz when he was in my class, because he always took the opposite point of view from the rest of the students. So I didn't need to be the devil's advocate when he was in the class. He assumed that role and he meant it. For me, it was a teaching tactic. And so I think lawyers and certainly judges have to be willing to decide cases based on objective, neutral principles rather than personal political ideology.
If I want to take what you just said to the extreme, you said that in writing the case for Trump, it was very easy for you because you just had to change the title. You started writing a book named The Case for Hillary,
That's right.
which because the Republican wanted to do the impeachment for Hillary, and then you said no, you cannot do it according to the law, and then you just almost change the title because it doesn't matter if the impeachment is from right to left or left to right, it is wrong to do it. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely correct. And nobody under the American Constitution should be impeached for abuse of power, obstruction of Congress. The Constitution says treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That doesn't include non-criminal political differences like abuse of power or obstruction of Congress. And so I would have made that argument just as powerfully on behalf of Hillary Clinton. I made that argument on behalf of Bill Clinton. And I was a consultant to the legal team of Bill Clinton and made the same argument. And if Joe Biden were to be impeached, as the Republicans might very well try to do if they were to gain control of the House, I would defend him as vociferously as I defended Donald Trump.
Okay, so please, let's move on. Just yesterday, YouTube censored yet again one of PragerU videos, Candace Owens shows, and classified it as hate speech. Now, you yourself said to Dennis Prager, I'm a liberal, but my biggest enemy is the left. And now we see, like many times, even now there is a new book named In Defense of Looting, a victorious history of uncivil action. So as to paraphrase or to quote Shakespeare, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and I will say that something is rotten in the liberal left. And my question is, do you think that there will be an impasse or like a point where they say, listen, we need to recalculate our route and change direction?
Well, first of all, never use the term liberal in connection with the left. I'm a liberal. I strongly support liberal values. Liberal values support free speech, due process, equality. My enemies are the radical left. The radical left has never supported liberty, has never supported free speech. The radical left is closer to Stalin and Mao than they are to liberals like John Stuart Mill or others. So I'm a liberal, but I'm very much an anti-radical left. And the problem with the radical left today is that they are supporting all kinds of restrictions on free speech. Most recently, a petition was circulated at Harvard University asking Harvard to ban all people who had anything to do with the Trump administration, including me. I taught at Harvard for 50 years, and now these students want to prevent me from speaking at Harvard. Well, I will speak at Harvard, and I will say whatever I please because I believe strongly in free speech, and I will represent free of charge anybody who is prevented from speaking at Harvard because of their association with any administration. It would be the same as if some people from the extreme right said, we're going to ban people who have been part of the Obama administration. Both would be equally wrong. So I'm going to fight against that.
But it doesn't happen. We don't say
it doesn't happen. It's only the hard left.
Look, say, I won't be friends. There was like a CNN reporter who said that he like stopped being friend with anyone who voted for Trump. So how come the left, which was supposed to be liberal, is got itself into this lunatic? Well, it's just
first of all, the hard left has never been liberal. The hard left has always been radical and anti-liberal. The liberals in the world are the center left and the center right, center conservatives, center liberals. They're the ones who express liberal principles. Let's remember the same thing came from the right when I was in college. It was called McCarthyism. And people from the right were trying to censor people from the left. And I opposed it then. And I equally oppose today efforts by the hard left to impose censorship on people from the right or the hard right or even the center right. Today, I've been canceled and censored at colleges around the country because I defended President Trump on the floor of the Senate. And I will not accept that. I will fight back. So let's be very careful. not to confuse liberalism, which I support. In fact, I wrote a book called The Case for Liberalism in an Age of Extremism, or Why I Left the Left but Couldn't Join the Right. I believe strongly in liberalism, and liberalism believes strongly in free speech and due process and equality. The hard left doesn't believe in any of those principles. It believes in censorship. It believes in guilt by accusation, another book I wrote. And it doesn't believe in meritocracy or equality. It believes in identity politics. People should get jobs based not on the quality of their character or their intellect, but on their racial, ethnic, sexual, religious, and other identification. Those are all anti-liberal principles, which I strongly oppose.
Let's just hope that Ocasio-Cortez doesn't Ocasio-Cortez doesn't genuinely represent the new Democratic Party right now. So since we don't have a lot of time, let me just ask you two more questions. One, could you please elaborate in your book, The Case for Israel, you mentioned the 80% rule. Could you please elaborate on this? Because I think for the Israeli viewers who are watching this, it is extremely important.
The 80% agreement you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, most pro-Israel people agree on 80% of the issues involving Israel. They agree that Israel has the right to exist and thrive as the nation state of the Jewish people. They believe that Israel has the right to defend itself and its security from terrorism, from rockets, from terror tunnels, from aggression, from Hezbollah, from Hamas, from terrorists on the West Bank. They believe that Israel has the right to construct a security barrier. They may disagree about where it should be and whether or not it should take over land that was used by Palestinians. Those are areas of disagreement. But the areas of agreement are far, far, far greater than the areas of disagreement. And I think that pro-Israel supporters should focus on the areas of agreement, not the areas of disagreement. Give you another example. The vast majority of Israelis agree that the deal with Iran that was made by President Obama was wrong and dangerous for Israel because of its sunset provision. A lot of American Jews, on the other hand, J Street and Jewish Voice for Peace or others, support the Iran deal. So that's not part of the 80%. There are those, particularly American Jews and Jews in Europe, that don't support the 80% consensus. But I think that pro-Israel people should stay together and defend the 80%, and they can disagree over the 20%.
Okay, and the last question. You are in Israel at the election day, and I hear that you will come soon, probably to another election day. Now, I attended your speech there, and you concluded your speech with something profoundly important. You said, Hashem oz le'amo iten, and then you said that we, as the Jewish people in the Jewish state, must have oz, which is power. We cannot rely on no one to save us. So, right. Which is, of course, related to the Pollard case. Now, can you please elaborate what exactly did you mean, and how does this wisdom might change the way that the government or the Israeli government need to work with the new president or the new administration?
Elie Wiesel once said that the lesson for him of the Shoah is always believe the threats of your enemies before you believe the promises of your friends. Israel can never rely on the United States for its continued ability to defend itself. It has to maintain close relations with the United States. The United States is the most important ally, but Israel has to prepare for a potential time when AOC and others may take over the Democratic Party. Look, it came close. If some of the people who ran for the Democratic nomination, Bernie Sanders or others, had won, Israel's relationship with the United States would be severely damaged. It was damaged under some Republicans as well, George H.W. Bush and Dwight Eisenhower. So Israel has to develop an ability, and it has developed an ability to defend itself, and it must be able to stand alone. And the most striking example is Israel may, hopefully not, but may have to destroy the Iranian nuclear capacity by itself. It may have to do that. Hopefully it would have the help of the United States. Hopefully Iran would not move toward developing nuclear weapons, but I believe it probably will. And unless it believes that Israel will, by itself or with the help of the United States, prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear-armed enemy, Israel would face an existential crisis. So Hashem Ozli Amoyutain is a very important lesson. The history of the Holocaust is a history that Jews get peace only through strength. Jews don't get peace through friendship or through mercy or through compassion. Mahatma Gandhi, the great Indian, didn't support the Jews during the Holocaust. Many other people didn't support the Jews during the Holocaust. Many in Britain didn't support the Jews during the Holocaust. Churchill did. Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't do enough to allow Jews to come into the United States. So Jews and the nation state of the Jewish people have to be prepared to defend itself. That's the lesson of the Shoah. That's the lesson of Israel's existence from the very beginning. It fought its war of independence alone without the help of the United States. It basically fought the '67 war alone. Hopefully the alliance between Israel and the United States will continue, but Israel has to be prepared to go to it alone and to always defend its existence, its ability to thrive by itself. And it is doing so. It's doing a great job militarily, economically, scientifically, diplomatically. And so no country in history has done as well in the first 72 years of its existence as Israel has done, and may it go from strength to strength.
Professor Allen, thank you so much. Like always, it was an eye-opening interview. Thank you so much for your time and for everything that you do for free speech, for the liberal movement in the US, and of course for Israel. Many, many, many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions. It was an honor for me to be on your show.